So we're going to get started with the next group, who I would like to introduce. We have Katie Ott, who's the Senior Manager of Federal Government Affairs at Exelon, first on my right, followed by Skiles Boyd. Skiles is the Vice President for Environmental Management and Resources at DTE Energy. Third, we have Erika Guerra. Erika is with Government Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility at Holcim. And finally, we have Kevin Leahy. Kevin is the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at Duke Energy. I want to welcome you all here. I really appreciate your willingness to participate in the panel. I know that energy and climate policy is something that's near and dear to all your hearts. In the same way that Bob mentioned, there isn't a state that isn't doing something. I know that there's not a business that isn't thinking about this. And what we wanted to do was gather a few businesses who have thought about it a lot. Not to say that they're through thinking or that they aren't reacting to what's going around them. But I think it's safe to say that the people that we've gathered here, it's not the result of the Clean Power Plan that they've begun to think about energy, environmental, climate policy. It's an issue that they've been considering for some time and have thought about how their business assets and investments align with that and how they can best contribute and react to policy solutions. I guess to start us off, I am going to ask individual questions, but we'll open up and we'll eventually, not eventually like it's going to be a long time from now, but in a short amount of time, we will ask you all to ask your own questions. And I'll be just very interested in what you all have to say to those questions. But just a question for the entire panel. We did hear from economists, and as I mentioned, you guys have been considering this for a long time. You've probably heard from many, many economists and many, many lawyers that markets can be part of a climate solution. You also heard just now, and I'm sure you've heard it in the past, that there are barriers to adopting markets at the state level. What is your thought on the use of markets, the desirability, and what should, not to be too normative, but what should states be thinking about, and even what should businesses be thinking about who want to engage with states on putting in place market mechanisms to address climate? And I'll start with Katie, and we'll go down the line.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. And thank you for having me here today and having Exelon on this panel. I'm really grateful to be at a conference called the Solutions Panel. Yesterday I had the opportunity to attend a House hearing on 111D, so the tone today has been really nice. Really enjoyed it. So I'm happy to be here, and certainly for Exelon and with my colleagues here. It's a pretty simple answer for me. Exelon certainly supports market structures and market mechanisms as a compliance tool, both for 111D and for climate change and greenhouse gas reductions in general. We certainly think that markets have successfully internalized the cost of pollution before, and there's no reason why they can't do it again, this time with greenhouse gases. And in fact, Exelon has, along with some other companies and NGOs, has put forward our own kind of policy proposal on how to do that, and we can certainly get into that. But we do think that market mechanisms are probably one of the cleanest, easiest, and least cost ways to meet these goals.
Great, thanks, Katie. Skiles, how would you react?
Well, market approaches are usually the best approach to minimize overall costs. But as we all know, and what we saw when Waxman Markey started to unravel, is the details of how you set that market up is very key, because there can be winners and losers. In fact, there will be winners and losers. And money's flowing a lot of different ways. I look at this and, under 111D, it doesn't appear that the Clean Air Act can, that they can mandate a market-based approach. So that means this is all going to be voluntary, which makes it even a little more complicated, because, there are going to be a lot of politics involved. And each state, whether it's the legislators in the state or the public service commissioners in the state or the utilities or the businesses and other customer groups will all be very interested and want to have a significant amount of input on this. So, they need all the stakeholders will need to make sure that the process doesn't unfairly affect them or their constituents. I believe at the end of the day, a market pricing mechanism will be the most efficient approach. And I do believe that it can be worked into the electricity dispatch system. But it'll take time to develop. Longer than I think the present rule proposal provides for. So what do? You either provide more time up front to do it, or maybe and a lot of people have talked about this market readiness, set some key things up so that you can move into it over time, and therefore the EPA has to be a little more flexible than they've at least proposed on how they set up this state implementation type plan. So, bottom line, it's probably the right approach. I think it can be worked into the most reliable electricity dispatch distribution system in the world. But it'll be important that either upfront or in the way that you can kind of phase into it, you provide enough time that you can work the details out so that people will accept it. I mean, those that, when money's flowing out of a state, legislators get very sensitive. And, and so there will be pushback, and what you have to show is that even when that happens, that for the customer, it's the best thing. And that's what we all have to keep in mind. It's really the customer that is critical here.
Thank you. And definitely follow up on that. Erika, what do you think about markets? You're the only international business, the only global business on this panel. Holcim is, and wondering what you think about market mechanisms and the applicability to the Clean Power Plan as part of the state implementation program.
So we're one of those customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And of course for us, I mean, as a company, as you mentioned before, Jeff, we've been long engaged on promoting and making sure that we internalize the cost of carbon in our operation. We're very energy intensive, and it's part of our survival. It's the the holy grail of sustainability, and that's our key issue to remain a sustainable industry. We're in the cement business, for those who haven't heard about our company, and just to give you kind of a flavor of what we're facing as a company, in 2020, 60% of our operations across the globe will be on their carbon regime. I mean, carbon tax, or so for us, I mean, it's like, it's just something that we gotta account into our business planning. But for us, I guess one of the key components that we would like to see domestically here is that we ensure that whatever design states choose is that we have a fair trade. We're really concerned about not level the playing field between states and competitors. I mean, that's something that that both of you raised. That's one of our concerns, and we're we're watching closely what California does. I mean, they in fact picked the cement sector in an initiative to start looking and thinking about border adjustment measures from imports coming from other countries into California. And that's something that for us is one of the requirements that we would like to see for any market mechanism or any form of carbon trade. And the other one is, that ensure consistency and eventually the convergence of pricing. I mean, that, we understand that it's not going to happen right away, but we would like to see a mechanism or a path that will get to that convergence on pricing. I mean, that's the only way that we're going to be making the right investments in the right places, and otherwise geographies will be affected by kind of midterm visions. And our industry is not only very energy intensive, it's also very capital intensive. So it's not something that we can just flip the switch and go to another state, but it can certainly distort the market if those two are not taken into account. So I guess I can talk later about the need for having a regional and even a global sectoral approach.
Great. Yes, you'll get that chance. Kevin?
Yeah, so Duke Energy operates in 6 states where the Clean Power Plan has caused a huge amount of excitement, but not happy excitement. So, it's a very tough job, I think, for our regulators to figure out exactly what sort of approach they're going to apply, and certainly we'll be happy to participate in that process as those discussions really go on, are launched, right? But I think a lot of them are waiting to find out what the final rule is going to be. So, but I was interested to hear Rhode Island's results of being in RGGI with their carbon emissions down. I think you said 25% or 40%. Okay, so across the region. So our experience since '05, our emissions are down 15% with a zero carbon price, but that's due to natural gas price drop, which, if natural gas were still $8, that would be the equivalent of more or less a rough CO2 price of about $50. So we are extremely price responsive in terms of how we operate our fleet. And the thing I always remind people is whatever the price is today, that impacts the operation of the existing assets. Whatever we expect the price to be going forward impacts our investment decisions going forward in terms of technology choice and so forth and so on. So yes, our sector is extremely responsive. And I would say, we've had good experience that a price on emissions can be extremely cost effective, but I also caution people that cost effectiveness is not the only consideration quite often in particular jurisdictions. You'll see, for example, a preference sometimes for particular technologies. Our renewable portfolio standard, for example, on top of a market-based solution. It does not create any additional emissions reductions. It raises the cost of a program, but people like it. So sometimes that's part of what happens in the thing. Also, sometimes people prefer assets in their zip codes, so that impacts tax base or employment or this or that, even if it might be less costly to trade and bring in product or emissions reductions from out of state. So all of these things come into this stew for policymakers, which, if ever I feel sorry for myself, I just look at them and say, well, at least I don't have to deal with all that. So, it's tough. Sure, a price would be great, but it all depends. We always use, or I should use the pronoun I always use, we have a coal state, Indiana. That's my canary. How hard is it? How painful is it? And so we always try to construct something where, the bogey we used back in the Waxman-Markey days was try to keep rate increases in the low single digits for Indiana. And if it works for them, that's going to work for the whole country. And then start off slow and grow. The cliff that we face in the Clean Power Plan creates challenges. Our mantra, we always used to say slow, stop, and reverse for an emissions pathway. This looks a little bit drastic. Anything that can be done to moderate that as part of the overall framework linked into a market could all be good.
That's great. Thanks to you all. I think when people assert that markets are the best solution, it begs the question, best compared to what? and compared to what is kind of infinite in terms of, what might be considered. So just narrowing down to the idea of compared to just saying no. Let's say compared to not completing a state implementation plan. How do you respond to, well, it's not better than just saying no. If we just say no, that's also a solution. What's your response to that, to just saying no, in terms of either the Indiana Canary or the consumer or any other sort of objective the state might have?
I'll talk. I mean, at least in Michigan and with our company, and most of my peers, looking at just saying no gives you tremendous uncertainty. There will be a federal plan. They will implement something. Whether what happens in the courts will happen in the courts anyway, probably. But what we look at is, let's try to develop a rule base that will be the best deal we can for our customers. And then whatever happens later will happen later, but at least if it all survives all the legal challenges, which it certainly could, and I wouldn't bet any of my salary on outcome either way. Mm-hmm. But it's the best deal that you could get under that process. So we're trying to take care of the cliff issue that Kevin mentioned, because instead of single digit rate increases, you're talking 10% a year for several years, and our customers will go ballistic. So that's a problem. I mean, we think market mechanisms can certainly help minimize that cost overall, but that'll take time. So our leaning now is more towards this market readiness approach, that they build something into the rules that allow us to work our way into it. But we think all those things are better than just saying no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. Certainly, I think this concept of just say no is political in its formation, but I think it's also our responsibility and the responsibility of states and other organizations to bring forth potential solutions and bring forth a way that you don't have to say no. Here's how you can comply, and in a reasonable, hopefully least cost manner. I mentioned earlier that we have put forth a solution in our comments to EPA on 111D, along with other companies like Calpine and NGOs like Third Way. They've also identified this as a potential solution. And I should mention our trade associations, EEI and NEI, have also included it in their comments. So it's something that we're working on and still developing, but we call it Reliability Dispatch Safe Harbor. And essentially, we think that EPA could determine a uniform per ton fee on carbon that would be commensurate with the interim goals, with the interim targets for states. So the price per ton would get you the same reductions that are required by the Clean Power Plan. If a state were to take that price and opt into this plan and utilize that price in their energy markets, then they would be deemed in compliance with their interim goals. And this really came out of a lot of the concern that we have heard about interim goals and the difficulty in meeting them so quickly and the timing. So we thought, well, let's come up with some way to give states a safe harbor from having to meet those interim goals, but also getting the road, getting things moving in terms of meeting some of those reduction goals. So basically, generators would bid into the market a price that includes a CO2 adder, whatever EPA decides the appropriate price is. The bid would then clear the market. Payments would go back to emitting generators. A CO2 credit would be added to load-serving entities, and the load-serving entity could then pass that through to their consumers. Or if a state decided they wanted to use that for something else, as several states in the RGGI program do, they could use that for investments in renewable energies or energy efficiency, whatever it may be. So it really, adds a signal at to the markets that this will be the price of carbon for the interim period. And we think it addresses a lot of the concerns that we've heard about interim goals, certainly from states about the difficulty of creating these plans with limited budgets and limited staff. Really, if a state chooses to adopt it, they take, EPA sets the price, a state agrees to do this, and they set it and forget it. They take the price and move through their interim period. So, that's just one of the things that we're trying to think of ways to help states not have to say no and find reasonable ways to meet these targets that EPA set out.
All right.
I think that states that are saying no, I think that there are probably sound reasons for that strategy. For us as emitters who are going to have to comply with whatever rules ultimately emerge, it's our interest that conversations continue. They don't have to be loud conversations, but I'm sure people are thinking about the hows ultimately. I mean, the rules are going to be refined in the courts. We're going to have a federal implementation plan to deal with, so whether that's a happy plan or an unhappy plan or whatever, I've heard it called the happy FIP or the grouchy FIP, whichever, that, we hope for a happy FIP, with maybe something where states can opt in with a centrally administered registry, where we can comply by trading a fungible allowance, right? And we don't have to have the complexity of our state agreeing to participate in a RGGI sort of program with a design market and all of that. It's just, markets emerge, and if we are allowed to trade, we will. So
That's great. You talk about quiet conversations. Without giving away anything, what is the nature of your interactions with states? Does it tend to be at the association level? Does it tend to be one-on-one? And if you could, since the whole idea is to get businesses and states together and talking, what's the best way to continue the conversation? What do you find works? Is it put forth a solution? Listen? What do you do? You did the last one.
Yeah, I did the last one. I figured I'd let somebody else do that.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I think we're trying to be good partners and not lone wolves, let's say, in this whole process. So, we're talking with other utilities, other stakeholders within our states. Certainly, we have assets in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic and Florida. So we're in ISOs and MISO and PJM. So we're active in those processes. And in the Carolinas, I'd say we're probably well plugged in Florida. So conversations are happening, not necessarily one-on-one with our regulators, but people are chatting, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And you get the impression that these are broader than just the generators? Is it a general stakeholder engagement?
Ours are,
or not yet?
We're mostly with other generators.
Other generators. Mm-hmm.
I think that, from our point of view is make sure that, especially if you start talking about compliance with block number 4, that there is a good, robust stakeholder process within those who are, your main consumers. And we haven't seen much of that happening. I mean, we're more, our footprint is, it's more like in the Rocky Mountains, part of the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest. So, we participate when we're invited, but at the moment, I will say that we're more on the observant role.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, when I heard you describe how are you working all this with stakeholders, with one-on-one, my answer was yes.
Yeah. All the above?
All the above.
Mm-hmm.
We were very active with our state public service commissioners and Department of Environmental Quality on developing comments on the rules, along with the environmental community and our customers, which is, again, that's the key. If they're really upset with us, they're going to be upset with all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can focus on doing this the best way we can in their eyes, whether it's industrial customers, and some of those are competing internationally, and that's real important, or residential customers in Michigan, Detroit area, they're still recovering from the downturn in the economy. So that's all very important. So if we can put together a program that does it best for them, it's going to cost money, but it does it best for them, then we've done our job.
Yeah, I would just second what everyone's said. If there's someone who's willing to talk to us, we'll talk to them. We certainly have been engaging in a lot of outreach in our states, and mostly have tried to be responsive to what we're hearing from them. And we operate largely in restructured states and competitive markets, and so what we were hearing from them was, is there a way to work within the existing structure that we have, the existing market mechanism, which is, again, how this idea was born. But those conversations will certainly continue and probably intensify, so always happy to talk.
Great. Not a jealous suitor. I like that.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Katie, just following up on, you obviously, you have a proposal, so you do have a preferred type of market mechanism. I'm wondering, I know that Exelon operates a large nuclear fleet, and the importance of low carbon power in the form of nuclear is well known. It's certainly something that we talk about quite a bit at C2ES. I'm wondering, how does a price help the nuclear fleet in particular that you operate, or how would it?
Well, essentially, we think a carbon price is the most equitable way to value zero carbon technology. It's technology neutral, it's age neutral, it just values the zero carbon power, whether it's from renewables, which, by the way, we also have a lot of wind and solar. I think we're the 11th largest wind producer. And we just see it as kind of the most equitable way that the markets already understand how to respond to a price. And it's a way to signal to the markets that there is a value. Through this regulation, EPA is trying to put a value on zero carbon emissions and reducing carbon emissions. So we see this as the best mechanism for that.
Great. Skiles, if you were going to give advice to states on how they would try to develop a dialogue or to engage with businesses, you talk about a variety of businesses who want to, customers who want to provide their feedback and input to the development of a plan. What would be your ideal forum, or what would you recommend to someone who wanted to bring that about? What do you need?
Well, and again, I'll refer to Michigan. That's what I'm most familiar with. That's where all of our electricity generation is in our system. The governor has basically assigned, his staff and the Public Service Commission and the Department of Environmental Quality to work together on this and involve all the appropriate stakeholders. That may be, since we haven't really started, in fact, our chairman of our Public Service Commission said at a FERC meeting recently that he's waiting to see the final rules, which is very important to start that process because you don't know really what you're coming up with. So, I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, whether it's smaller groups to get input, but those two groups, the Department of Environmental Quality to make sure we get the environmental outcome that we need, and the Public Service Commission that's looking out for all the customers in the state are going to be the key players in the whole thing, coordinated by the governor's office directly. So I think that's probably the best process, whether we're all sitting in the same room at the same time. That sometimes is good, sometimes isn't. So we'll have to see how those dynamics work out. But the key is to get as much input, and I think David had indicated that what you want is as much input and as many ideas as you can get, and then we're going to have to narrow that down and figure out what the best plan is.
That's great. Erika, as we mentioned, Holcim is a global company, and you mentioned, I believe that 60% of your assets currently face a carbon regulation of some sort. They're in a jurisdiction.
Well, by 2020.
By 2020, okay. What has been your experience with engagement on development of these regulations in other areas? What do you look for, and how would you measure whether a particular initiative is successful, if it meets your criteria as a customer? And I assume in some of those jurisdictions you're not only pass through a price from someone who's regulated, but you are directly regulated. So what do you like to see in a plan?
So as I mentioned before, I mean, I guess the industry in general has been responsible in the sense that back in the early 90s got together and at least agree on how we were going to monitor and we were going to report. I mean, that's huge for our sector. I know that, back in the days of potential federal legislation, I mean, we were probably one of the few industries that we were able to, demonstrate with numbers what was possible. And I guess that's probably one of the main elements that we would like to see on any program that is, that's the startup, and it's about the feasibility, that this is something that is really achievable, is feasible, and it's not just going to displace investments to places where there is not a carbon system or a carbon regulation. So for us, I mean, I think the responsibility came from the need to make sure that we were able to demonstrate within that dialogue that it was something that could be achieved by the industry. I think another key element for us is that it has to be fair to trade. And our product travels, once you put cement on a barge, I mean, it can travel from Asia to California and from Venezuela to Europe. I mean, it's really a very easy commodity to
portable.
transport. Very portable. And so for us, ensuring that there is that fair trade across the world, and for many years, we were our goal as an industry was to eventually have an international sectoral agreement. I mean, we really see that as the main, probably that's the holy grail, but when you start thinking about it, but as a sector, I mean, it is just one product. We're not as complicated as other industrial sectors. It's just one product, and it's tradable international. So, and that's why I think the legwork has been done by the industry. That will be for us probably our dream. So when we're hearing under the current proposed rule that the regionalization of implementation is very tough, and there are not enough time and so on. That's very scary for an industry that is so capital intensive, and because at the end of the day, we want to have at least those, those regional approaches at the very least, and ultimately convergency on pricing. So those are the other two elements, and obviously it has to achieve the environmental goal. I mean, we've seen, we participate in many systems, and we're not sure that we're really, getting there. And probably the most robust experience that we have with market mechanisms is within the EU ETS system. And of course, the issue there is the problem of having a fixed amount of allowances being released, and that just distortions the market. And we've been in both sides of the spectrum as a company, as far as what the distortion created for, at the very beginning, it was, we were over-incentivized, and now we're seeing that probably the best, the most efficient assets are not the ones that are really gaining much into the system. So that's, those are just details within the cap and trade system that we have there, but I think those experiences are something that, we're trying to make sure that at least we transfer to other market mechanisms. And,
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm sure it would be great to have the underlying efficiency impacted by a carbon price, but not overturned and placed on its head as a result. Okay, going back to, I guess, domestic regulation, Kevin, I know that you have a lot of experience with environmental markets in the U.S., in the power sector, acid rain regulation. What has been your experience with those, as well as the renewable energy credit trading markets, and what can we learn from those, or what can states learn in terms of putting programs in place?
Well, that's a great question. So the thing with the acid rain program, it was sort of developed before anybody before it was part of the big conversation, right? So we had this thing with allowance allocations for grandfathered units, which really moderated the rate impacts for consumers. And at that time, we were all in regulated cost of service states, so all those allowances, the value of those flowed through to the ratepayer, and the rate increases were moderate, and it was sort of a big shrug. Oh well, no big deal. And that allowed then the utilities to take the value of those allowances as well, and if they retired a plant, they still had that endowment, which allowed them to reinvest in new, cleaner emitting assets, or even invest in some of the scrubbers and SCRs that units needed. So it was really a terrific mechanism. It was not as efficient, quote, as an auction might have been, but an auction would have created notable rate impacts, which would have had its own political blowback, right? So, and it would have had some impact on the customer base, and particularly for us, we operate in a lot of heavy industrialized states that are subject to a lot of international trade pressures and so on. So this was a way that, there were trade-offs for efficiency versus those sorts of benefits of taking care of those local concerns. And I think that was a terrific lesson. The thing I hearken back to Waxman Markey, or even my favorite, Cary Graham Lieberman, which nobody never mentions these days, particularly, well, never mind. But there were provisions in those laws for border tax adjustment, right, which was very helpful, I think, or could have been very helpful. One of my concerns as we move forward in this conversation, in terms particularly around taxes, you're going to have to get the same impact of a market, a tradable permit system with allocations. To result in the same electricity price changes, you're going to have very small prices for that tax.
Small price impacts. Yeah.
Well, the tax itself would have to be very small to cause the same electric price changes, whereas you can have a quite a bit higher price with the cap and trade system, but with an allocation on top of that, you'd have the same retail impact. So that's something I would put forward as potentially a concern to be explored.
High marginal price, low average.
Exactly. And so particularly in the absence of a border tax adjustment, that may be something that is more important in the conversation going forward. I don't know if I answered the question, but I was captured by
That's great. Skiles, you had said before
I see you.
you
Adele's going.
Skiles, how would you define success in what we're about to undertake here with the release of the final rule? Maybe you don't want to define it very strictly, but what would you like to see in terms of what we're about to engage in?
Well, success, I look at success shorter term.
Mm-hmm.
There's also success longer term. Since I'm, getting to be an old guy, shorter term is more of my
More relevant.
focus. But, I think a program that gives the states true flexibility, and time is an important part of that true flexibility. And enough time to minimize a lot of the potential disruptions and allow for development of market-based approaches, I think will be very key. And again, that could be more time to develop, or it could be, this market readiness approach that allows you to move into it at some later date. I think some system that you can at least trade within the dispatch systems that are located around the country. For Michigan, we're in the Midwest Independent System operation. So which runs from Michigan to Louisiana, but doesn't include all the states in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's kind of a funny system. And then the other thing is you're going to have some mechanism for border type issues. I mean, we import and export electricity into Ontario and Michigan, so even that, and and even within the systems, there's a plant that's in Michigan, gas combined cycle plant, that has decided it's going to sell all of its power into PJM. So you've got to factor in those kind of things also. And so I think a system that sets it up so minimizes cost impacts to your customers, addresses this early stage approach, very significant reductions in the early years, sets it up so markets can at least work their way in over time, I think would be success. And a role that withstands whatever the legal challenges that come.
That would also be a measure of success.
Right. In fact, I was talking to Janet earlier last week, and I said one of the things I'd like to see before I retire is some beginning of the carbon, regulatory process. So, some people have told me you may never get to retire, but but I hope they're wrong.
Anybody else to take the question of success, and after that we'll open it up to the audience. Erika?
Yeah, I think it's, from a consumer point of view is, what the panel before mentioned, that is access to affordable and reliable energy. And to us, that will be a successful role. And how to get there, obviously, one of our key components is either regional or national approach to that. I mean, I think as far as energy efficiency for the end user, especially for the industrial end user, the motivation has been there without this rule. I mean, we've been just becoming more efficient, more from a business perspective, and being more competitive in our markets. And I think incentives in the form of demand response as exists today in some of these networks, we want those to continue, and most of them are voluntary today. But those are the kind of things that we would like to continue seeing, and that we have a business incentive to participate and to be as efficient as possible. And that's something that we would like to see and call it a success, remaining under those, on the applicability of that rule.
Great. Any other success?
I would just add quickly, and I'll be brief, I would also like to see carbon regulation before I retire.
You have a better chance.
Two things
So
in the short term and long term. Short term, we certainly would like to see EPA include in its final rule an indication that for price-based compliance, that states can comply by adopting a carbon price. We think that's very important that EPA include that in their final rule. And long term, I think we've touched on this, but certainty for generators, certainty as we go forward to 2029 and 2030 and final goals, but also beyond that. So that's obviously something that's very important to our business and our customers as well.
All right. Let's go ahead.
Well, I have a thought too. I probably shouldn't even say it, but what the heck? So I think success would be a system emerges where, or even the EPA even facilitates the emergence of this, perhaps through the creation of a registry or whatever that states allow emitters to opt into, and then we can begin to trade. I would say we probably don't need a lot of heavy state infrastructure. We don't need a state to probably create a market for us. I mean, we know how to trade. We trade SO2 allowances, we trade NOx allowances, we trade renewable energy certificates, we trade natural gas contracts, and in some parts of the country we trade electricity. So that happens. We know how to do that. But what we need is knowing that what we're trading is a fungible commodity. There's not 3 copies of it floating around, right? So that's easy enough, I think. We already know what we emit. We have the monitors on all of our stacks. We already report those emissions. So, doing the matching exercise, I think, is pretty straightforward. If our states decide to layer policies on top of a market, if they allowed participation in a market and layer policies on top of that, if they do that with their eyes wide open, that they're not getting additional emissions reductions that way, they're just getting favored policies. That's fine if it meets local needs, right, or local preferences, but they're not becoming greener by doing that. And I think that that's something that's important to be part of that conversation, that they realize that, it's good to have your local standard, but know that that's not for environmental reasons necessarily, that's for other valuable reasons that are important to you. So.
Great. Thank you. So we do have a microphone in the back, and in order to, and we'll come to you, but in order to get as much participation as we can, we'll actually take a couple questions and then feed it to them and iterate that way if it's okay. Ellie over here in the back. And please state your name.
Great, thanks guys for being here. Lee Logan with Inside EPA Newsletter. I was interested in this idea of a friendly FIP or a grouchy FIP, excuse me, and whether if EPA were to create kind of a backstop trading program, as I think you were talking about a little bit, whether that kind of can act as both, or does it drive people to the table more toward a state program, or does it allow states to throw up their hands and say, okay, we're just going to go into EPA's program? How would that play out?
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you. Nigel Topping from We Mean Business Coalition. So doing a lot of work looking forward. We see very loud voice of business calling for a level playing field, clear, robust price on carbon. One of the things which really hampers a lot of the discourse, though, is very few people seem comfortable naming the price. So there's very little tools out there for people to have a good sense of where prices are going to land. You look in the EU, this has been the big failure. You want certainty, it's very difficult at the moment. Whereas in California, with the ratcheted floor and ceiling price, there's a corridor. I'd be really interested in the panels naming the corridor that I'd like to see the price land in say 2020 and 2030.
Okay.
No excuses.
Great. Anybody else want to get in on this round? If not, keep your question and we'll get you the next time. Okay, so 2 questions. Federal trading program, is that grouchy or friendly? And in addition to it being level geographically, is there a preference about price levels? Indiana,
Yeah,
Single digit.
Whether it's grouchy or friendly, I'd say that depends on what chair you're in, right? So some people would look at that very favorably. Others will, say, I'd rather do something else. I can see that happening.
do these different groups have names? Do they have?
I know no names, no.
Okay.
So,
No last names, of course.
Yeah, so, they may look at their, what they've got right now in the current proposal and say, we could do this, right? Through this mechanism, we don't have to deal with this other stuff, so we're moving forward. I could see that happening,
Mhm.
May not be necessarily what I would say is cost effective, but maybe good for them. So that's that. And in terms of the price, I mean, I always say, my Indiana example, that's 90% coal, a lot of manufacturing. Last few years have been tough. So I like to keep my rate increases at the beginning in the low single digits. I like people to shrug. So, if they know they're going up over time and that's enough transition pathway, I'm not going to define what that price will be, but it gives us time to build things, right? That whereby that price may go up, but there's less and less flowing through to them ultimately. Plus, it allows time for the emergence of lots of other systems, like a border tax adjustment if we ever have a federal plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, we don't have to name 2030 right now. Just, we presume it'll be higher than what 2012 would be.
All right. So Duke doesn't have all the answers. Are there any other thoughts on either the federal infrastructure for trading under a FIP, is that grouchy or friendly, and prices?
Well, I'll just say, I think, we've been clear, we are supportive of market mechanisms, including things like trading and cap and trade and Regi and others. I don't know, I defer to the other experts. I'm not sure that a FIP could mandate a federal trading program. I don't think so.
Barely allow it, that's what you had talked about.
Right,
Yeah,
but in a
yeah,
FIP, I'm not
yeah.
sure that could happen. And as far as, carbon pricing, excellent question. I can tell you that we have done some initial analysis for our proposal, and we use a price in the $15 to $20 range. Again, this is not something that we choose because we think that's the appropriate price. The goal is to get to the emissions reductions and what that price would allow. So we have used the $15 to $20 price, and that has resulted in really only between a 2 and 5% consumer rate impact on a regional basis. And that, I just keep in mind that on an annual average, at least for last year, utility rate increases were on average about 3.2%. So it's right in that range. And again, this is all very initial analysis, but I would also mention that PJM and ERCOT have done similar analyses, and they also kind of fall down in the $15 to $20 range.
Could I ask, is that $20, is that on all the tons, or it's just the tons above the goal?
Tons above.
Tons above the goal, which would be quite different when averaged out over all the emissions
right.
within the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that may have been the case for the graph that the chart, the state chart that we showed. That was not the price for all the tons
that was
emitted.
State by state.
That was a state by
right?
state,
Yeah.
but I don't think it was for all the tons. It was for the tons above the above the target.
And isn't that approach sort of economically equivalent to a cap and trade with 100% allocation?
Similar.
Right.
Similar results.
Yeah, so you can have that higher price but a lower rate.
Mm-hmm.
But different than the prices, let's say for Wax and Markey, where it was, this is what you pay for every ton emitted.
Yeah.
It's a very different economic impact. So, any other FIP comments or price comments?
I would just say that Michigan's a lot like Indiana with
Yeah.
heavy industrial, and so I like his canary.
Yeah. 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 All right. Next round.
Mike Guerra, Stanford Law School. I have a question about the broader context in the electricity sector into which the Clean Power Plan is going to be placed. And I think someone on the panel just mentioned sort of 3% rate increases on average happening. You know, there are low to mid single-digit rate increases that seem perhaps likely, I don't know, probable for the relatively the future because of low demand growth and the need to replace a lot of aging infrastructure. How do we, you know, when you layer Clean Power Plan compliance on top of that, how does that impact your thinking about what's possible, what makes sense for a solution?
Thanks. Business as usual comparison. Let's get Janet and Lucas.
Janet P, C2ES. So, Skiles, you brought this up, but if anybody else wanted to pile on about market readiness. And I hear a lot of people talking about, let's get market ready. What do you have to do to be market ready?
Great.
Lucas Befera, Argus Media, formerly of C2ES. For the panelists generally, I get the sense that the states perceive the mass-based approach as being the lightest lift. So if today I could tell you that all the states said, yes, we're doing a mass-based approach, would you object?
Okay, great. Question about business as usual and the forecast and low-cost impacts, but also relative to only slowly increasing electricity prices anyway. A question about market readiness and a question about take it or leave it, mass-based. Do you like it? Any or all, please.
Well, I guess in answer to the first one of business as usual, I think the key is the timing of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
If we can work it in with the transition that will occur because of aging infrastructure, then you know it'll have less of a financial impact on our customers. If we have to do it really fast, it'll have a much more significant impact, at least in the short term, which is, you know, there is nothing other than the short term when it comes to going to your Public Service Commission for rate increases. So, so that's one of the keys that we have is, you know, if we can work it into where we think things are going to happen generally anyway, then it's best for our customers. And I don't think it changes the outcome in any significant way anyway. So I guess that's my answer to that. The market readiness, I think, you know, having somebody set up a system that can account for the tons, and probably some factors that states can choose to adopt, so that we know a ton is a ton in Michigan, that's a ton in Indiana or Illinois, and all that, and some way of adjusting for these border issues, you know, outside of the regions, because you can't control where those electrons flow, and so, you know, some factor there that tries to account for that the best we can. I think those are kind of the key pieces. And clearly an EPA a process that allows them to go into that without some massive going back and revising your state plan that takes time and gets very complicated. So something that they set up clearly that you can step your way into that, I think will make it a lot better. And then what was the?
If they said it's mass-based, would you have any issue?
Whatever my state says, I think is the best idea.
you're a good stakeholder.
I try to be.
Katie?
Yes, let's see. So first, compliance costs layered on top of business as usual rate increases. As far as our proposal and really anything that states would be looking at, we only expect them to adopt or implement what would be the least cost compliance for that state. So whatever that, if it doesn't end up being reliability, dispatch, safe harbor, we can't imagine a state would then adopt that. Market readiness, again, our proposal uses existing market structures, so we think it's pretty market ready. And mass-based compliance or a mass-based approach, while I'm not sure that all the states are as enthusiastic about it as you are, we certainly would be supportive of a mass-based approach, and that's something that we've articulated in our comments as well.
Okay, great. Erika or Kevin? No obligation. That's fine.
Well, to the question of mass-based approach, generally speaking, maybe not bad. But the devil's in the details, right? If it was mass-based with full auction and the revenue used to, whatever, that might be problematic for us. Even if it were rebated back to households, I mean, you still have the industrial impact, which is problematic in some states. So, I'd say probably a step in the right direction, but there's still more we have to talk about. Market readiness, I mean, all the things Skiles said, and absolutely. I mean, you've got seams issues within markets. If a state is next to a state that's not doing that, how do we do that? We're not quite sure. So those are things to be worked on, and I can't remember the other questions. Sorry.
That's okay. I'd like to invite Bob back up if he wants to give some final. We don't have to all leave. Okay. Or you want us to leave?
No, you can stay. Please stay. I have something to say to you. No. Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for doing this. I mean, it's important to sort of get some of this stuff out sometimes and do our own thinking about how these things might work, why they won't, and start to get the conversation going even further into the public forum. And I want to thank all the speakers. Some of them had to leave to go, I know this is shocking, to a meeting at EPA. They were listening, I guess, in on the secret thing and said, we need those people over here. So, but I think I have 4 things I'd like to say that I hear from today. One is from our first speakers, Adele and Michael, who are still here and will be here for a couple minutes as we break if people want to catch them. But that there really is an efficacy to market-based mechanisms, and they do develop an efficient and cost-effective way to try to build a program of mitigation and emissions reductions. We've heard both from Michael and the state participants and me that the EPA plan has a tremendous amount of flexibility in it, and legally it has a lot of opportunity for flexibility. And we heard that there are issues that are on the table already as EPA is thinking of what its final rule will look like, including things like timing and how the different components align to allow the flexibility to be fully utilized. We've also heard that, at least from the states that are here today, and I think they probably are not, I know this, that they're not wildly different from many of their, if not all, of their colleagues, and that is they are thinking seriously about how to build these mechanisms in and what they will need to see to help them have a better shot at doing it. And you heard, I think pretty importantly, that they know that working with the business community is something that's going to be really important. And I think you heard from our business panel that they want to work with states. They actually have good ideas. They're already working with states on how they can work together to build good plans that include some aspects, if not a lot of aspects, of market mechanisms. So I think I even heard, Exelon say that we want to help. We want to help. I'm going to repeat that. We want to help states, get this done. And I think that is the kind of of atmosphere that really is happening out there in the field. And so I think this is a pretty good indication of that. And I think most importantly for me and for C2ES, I mean, our whole idea is to try to bring states, cities, and businesses together at a subnational level, if I can use those terms, to really start to make progress on solutions that can at some day show the way for the rest of the country and eventually the rest of the world. Erika, I thank you for bringing that up, because we ultimately need all of this to unfold in a big way, and I think, Adele, you already made that point. But I think the concept of common ground, which is often overused or underused, I mean, you can see that it exists. There is common ground on how to think through these planning processes, and it's important that we continue to pursue them. So I just want to say, again, in a little bit of advertising, that this is the first in a series of these discussions and forums that C2ES is going to be having. There's a list of the next couple of them out on the table, but the next one will be here on May 18th, and we'll be talking about the role of information technology in facilitating energy efficiency. And we heard a lot about what the customers, where their pain point might be. One of the aspirins that can be applied is a counterbalancing adjustment in the amount of fuel or energy that you use. We see this with cars, we see this with other sources. So all these pieces of the plan can start to work together so the state can do something that really becomes politically and socially acceptable. So it's really important that the technology is moving so quickly that we begin to have that discussion too. There's another whole sector that is evolving that also wants to lean in with states. And then after that, in June, we're going to talk about financing, how we finance some of these things, and we're going to co-host that at the George Washington University's Law School. So with that, I'm going to call this a forum, and I appreciate everybody hanging in there for 3 hours and some coffee and some pastries and some great conversations. And I really want to thank you guys and the state colleagues who were here today. Thank you very much, and let's give them a hand.